Lucky last is print, and I've left it until the end because I think it is the most interesting in this instance. After all, it is one of the big print corporations that stands accused. So, how will they go about covering their own defence? To start with, the two biggest papers in the Fairfax stable, The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, use the same two pieces about the first day of the trial. But when it comes to the way they're presented, some different editorial choices have been made. Firstly, the two pieces have slightly different angles, or perhaps more accurately, report on different parts of the day's proceedings. Louisa Hall and Michaela Whitbourne deal predominantly with the case put forward by Hockey, the plaintiff, and his QC. And Rick Fennerly focuses on Hockey's testimony and the cross examination of Hockey, as well as the context to the story. It's possible these reports were filed at different times during the day as the case developed, Hall and Whitbourne's first and then Fennerly's later on. The Sydney Morning Herald leads with the story on page one. It wasn't the lead story in any of the news bulletins from radio or TV we considered, nor is it the case with The Age that saves the story for pages 2 and 3. But their lead is another Hockey story, writing that his super plan had been slammed. I'd argue that slammed is a conclusively negative and consciously aggressive word, and it doesn't reflect well on the Treasurer's proposed policy. So this does seem like an opportunistic decision considering that Fairfax are currently being sued by the Treasurer. The Sydney Morning Herald headline is preceded by two quotes, one from each party in the lawsuit. And it's the second quote that's interesting here because this idea that Hockey giving as good as he gets is not something that's picked up on by The Age. It's used again in the Louisa Hall and Michaela Whitbourne piece, but when that's published in The Age, it doesn't make the cut. And I think that's a shame because it's a really useful quote and useful part of the story when one of the news values here is conflict. So I am surprised that it didn't make the Melbourne publication. This story sits most comfortably in print because it is so word focused. And while TV and radio journos can repeat the words from inside the courtroom, quoting is much easier here, and it can be done in greater detail without compromising the attention span of the audience. A lot of those quotes can come from perhaps less sexy characters in the case. You know, we've got the legal representatives quoted quite often. And significant space is given over to the words of those representatives, Matthew Collins QC, Bruce McClintock QC. The use of images is a nice, if somewhat expected, point of difference between the Fairfax News Corp publications. So while Hockey and his wife feature across all of the papers, the Fairfax ones don't print photos of their own people with the exception of one thumbnail in The Age. On the other hand, the Herald Sun and Daily Telegraph use an image of Fairfax CEO Greg Highwood, with the Telegraph using the Fairfax chief's name in their headline even, saying that Highwood handed threat against the Treasurer. And like slam before, threat is a powerful, negative connotation Latin word, and it reflects poorly on Highwood. So this is the key difference in the angle between the two paper companies. And perhaps this is some cross-paper rivalry playing out, just as Fairfax took a shot at Hockey's super plan, here News Corp are taking the opportunity to sling some mud back at Highwood. So another decision which suggests that that might be the case is the fact that the Daily Telegraph piece is paired with an opinion piece from Miranda Devine. And in this piece, entitled Hockey's Pain Laid Bare Over Words That Made His Frail Father Cry, she variously describes Hockey as vulnerable, as hurt, and then also calls the Fairfax emails extraordinarily intemperate. So even once Hockey's budget is sympathetically labelled as difficult here, it becomes quite obvious that there's an effort to paint Joe as victim and Fairfax as villain, I think. So I guess therein lies one of the story's key news values. Again, it's conflict. We've seen this a feature of the Daily Mail piece because of the tabloid possibilities. And here we've got another tabloid going for the same approach. So conflict is a reason for publication in all the papers ultimately, because we've got parties with reputations to uphold, parties with gains to be made, and that makes the story valuable. Moreover, in print, this story does have a greater relevance than in any other platform, because ultimately the story began here, the outcome is going to have the greatest impact here, particularly if hockey gets his way and is compensated to the amount that he is asking for.